That should start the stream. And let me get this all closed up, and we'll start in just a second. There we are. Close that. All right, and here we are. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us again for another episode of Wit and Wisdom. My name is Corey DeVos. I am the editor-in-chief of Integral Life, and I'm here as always with my very good friend, Dr. Keith Witt. How you doing, man?
Doing great as usual. When I'm talking with you, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing really, really good. It's starting to warm up even more out there. I just recently built my wife a new raised garden bed, so I'm looking forward to buying about a cubic yard and a half of dirt and fill it up. And spring is here, man. It's a good feeling.
Oh boy. One of my best birthday presents to Becky once was about 7 or 8 fruit trees. I said, I'm going to give you an orchard for your birthday. So I went out and dug all these holes and planted these trees. And by God, they all grew up and were fruit trees, gave us a lot of fruit and stuff. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. That's awesome. What do they say the measure of the wisdom is? Someone who plants a tree knowing that they'll never be able to enjoy it in their lifetime?
Well, it's a little depressing, but I can see that. I can see the logic behind that. At 69, it's not one I want to think about much.
Well, watch this segue. You ready? And speaking of planting seeds, we're here today to talk about integral parenting.
Yeah, there you go.
Did you like that? That was a good one.
Yeah, that's good. Good segue.
Yeah. So, Keith, I really do in my bones. I feel like this is by far the most important and immediate application of integral thought. It's one of the ways that we can really, really feel how integral enhances and improves our relationships with our significant others, with our kids, with our families and our extended families, etc. But this is really, I think, where the rubber, sort of hits the road. I mean, for me, until I became a parent, so much of integral was, sort of this, remained abstract and conceptual, right? And then you have a kid and you're like, okay, here's the territory. You know what I mean? No more maps. This is the actual territory. I get to watch integral emergence in real time with my kid, and I've got a responsibility because of that. So it's such a huge conversation, and one that is, particularly thrilling for me. So I can't wait to get into this. And before we do, I just want to say a couple things. First off, for all of you who are watching with us, we want you to be a part of this call. So if you are watching right now on Integral Live, which is integrallife.com/live, right underneath this video player, you should see a link to bring you into the Zoom app. If you come into the Zoom app, that'll allow you to actually ask us questions and make comments after Keith's presentation. And we always love it when you guys participate. So please do. If you have a question that you want to ask, there's 2 ways to go about it. You can either click the raise my hand button, which lets us know that you want us to turn your camera on, and you can talk to us directly, or you can hit the Q&A button and submit a written question, which we'll read on the air and then do it that way. So 2 different choices. Please come on and yeah, ask us your questions, make your comments. It's such a cool part of the show that we do every month. Secondly, I want to let everyone know that Integral Life has just launched a brand new web course, and it's awesome. It's really awesome. It's something that we collaborated with our really good friend Ryan Olkey, who is a co-founder of Buddhist Geeks. So if you're familiar with Buddhist Geeks, you might recognize Ryan's name. And he's a truly masterful coach. So the course, again, it's called Embodied Success. And the idea of it is that there's basically 2 tracks. One is the inner track, which focuses on, basically the paths of waking up, growing up, and cleaning up. So some really good embodied shadow practices and so forth. And then there's the outer track, which basically takes all of that inner work of waking up, growing up, cleaning up, and uses that work to create some leverage in order to help you better show up in your job, in your career. So the idea here, Ryan originally designed this for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, business leaders and such. But as we were building the course, it became increasingly obvious that this really is, hugely valuable to more than just entrepreneurs. So, if you're basically trying to find ways to align your sense of purpose and your passion and all that with your with your activities out there in the world, whether whether you own your own business, or you are just an employee, or you're just trying to find ways to bring this kind of embodied wisdom into your daily life. I really can't recommend it enough. And as always, Integral Life members get a 20% off discount on Embodied Success. So please go check it out. Go to the courses page on Integral Life, and it should be the very first course listed there. Check it out. I think you guys will all love it. So enough plugs. We're here to talk about parenting. Dr. Keith, take it away, man.
Well, first of all, one more plug. We have a survey that we have on this site, and Integral Life has it, on what brought people to Integral. We're really interested in that. So if you haven't filled it out, fill out the survey. And one more plug.
It's right underneath this player right here. If you're watching on Integral Live, there's a survey. If you scroll down the page, fill it out. It's real quick, just a few questions, and it'll really give us some valuable data in terms of what topics we want to explore next, and all of that. So yeah, please fill it out. It'll be tremendously helpful for us, and thank you.
So I'm a parent, and also for 45 years I've been a practitioner. And I'd say in 65,000 sessions that I've done, probably half of them have had to do with parenting of kids at all ages. And by all ages, I mean when people were planning on getting pregnant, all the way through people having adult children that they're dealing with in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. And I'm a parent myself, of course. And one of the great things about Integral is that Integral opened up an awful lot of perspectives on superior parenting. And in all 8 of the books that I've published, there are extensive parts of each book about parenting because it's that big a deal. One of the reasons I want to talk today about it is that I think there's a few misconceptions in this culture, specifically about parenting, but also about managing emotion, that I think is very important for parents to understand. And so we're going to be talking about that a little bit later. But first of all, anybody can be a superior parent, in my opinion. A superior parent is somebody that does their best to cherish and protect their child and is dedicated to a lifetime of growth as a parent, receiving caring influence to be a better parent. You can be a great parent at any value mean, any altitude. And what this reflects is that parenting on one level is enormously simple. We are biologically driven to have sex and have children. Once we have a child and we see that child and smell that child, we have powerful physiological forces that make us want to cherish that child and do well by that child. As that child matures, we have other instincts that make us want to give that child advantages and protect that child. Okay, this is all what we share with all mammals and other animals too. So on one hand, parenting is pretty simple. We're driven to do it. On the other hand, it's enormously complex and challenging because we have self-aware consciousness. And self-aware consciousness is a great blessing to us, but also in some ways it's a curse for us. Because with all the powers of self-aware consciousness come an awful lot of problems. And the first level of understanding and regulation that we have to deal with those problems comes from our parents, comes from the culture of our family of origin. And it's a very, very dynamic intersubjective process because children participate in their own development almost from the very beginning. And in that participation, parenting is co-created by the child and by the parent. And the child is reaching for certain kinds of parenting, and the parent is attuned, trying to give the child the parenting that child wants. And we're always doing that embedded in multiple cultures. And that's a big deal. Now, one thing that makes parenting so difficult is the problem of emotional pain. And that's something that I wanted to focus on today. There are a lot of approaches to parenting that have been validated by voluminous research. In other words, no matter what your orientation is, there's certain things as a parent that are going to work better for a kid. And if you don't do them, it's going to work worse. For instance, protecting the child from physical and psychological abuse and neglect. Okay? Sexual abuse and neglect, physiological abuse and neglect, emotional. Okay, you protect a child from those things and children do better. Okay, that's just all there is to it. Another thing is that growth mindsets are better for children than fixed mindsets. Growth mindsets, we focus on effort and progress. That's what we like in our family. That's what we like with you, our son or daughter. We don't focus on you have to be successful. If you make a mistake, that's shameful, that kind of stuff. We also know that of the different kinds of parenting, like indulgent parenting, not good for kids. Authoritarian parenting, pushing kids around, that's not good for kids. Absent parenting, where you don't get involved in your kid's life, that's not good for kids. Authoritative parenting, where a parent is fair but in charge, is really good for kids. Okay, we know this, and this is valid across value memes. And also, emotionally coaching children is better than having an emotionally dismissive attitude. And that's especially important in dealing with painful emotions. And we're going to get back to that. Emotional coaching is basically seeing an emotion when a child has one as an opportunity for intimacy and teaching. Noticing very, very low grade, low intensity, amplified emotions in a child, commenting on them when a child's able to discuss them, naming them, engaging in boundary setting and problem solving with a child, and then moving on, okay? That attitude towards emotions, which is called emotional coaching, has superior outcomes on every measure to children than emotional dismissing. Emotionally dismissing is you can choose what you feel, so why choose to feel bad? Kids sometimes are punished for feeling bad. Parents are not self-reflective. Emotional coaching parents are quite self-reflective about emotion. Emotionally dismissive parents are distrustful of self-reflection. Emotional dismissing is suck it up and carry on. They're very focused on their child being a happy child who looks good. And they get somewhat punitive in certain ways if the child doesn't, emotionally dismissing. Emotionally coaching, kids that have parents who are emotionally coaching are better academically, they're better socially, they're healthy, they have less inflammation markers, less cytokines. I mean, I could go on and on by almost every measure. And emotionally dismissing kids will have problems, though sometimes they can be quite good at certain things if parents are super demanding, dragging moms like that. Kids, certainly, if it's the right kid, a kid can respond with success to that, but rarely with happiness. Usually they're less happy. So I'm going to talk about that, but I want to talk about it from a particular perspective. And that perspective is that there is, I think, in the United States, a cultural pathology of having zero tolerance for emotional pain. Zero tolerance for emotional pain. A tenth of this country are on psychotropic drugs. A third of women of childbearing ages are on psychotropic drugs, mostly for depression and anxiety. And these are supposedly treatments for depression and anxiety. But you think if so many people are being treated for anxiety and depression, we should have less depression and anxiety, right? As a matter of fact, depression and anxiety rates are going up, both absolute numbers and in relative numbers, as percentages. So something's not right. So now I know there's a lot of things that go into this, but one of the things is a zero tolerance to pain standard. And what I mean by zero tolerance to pain is people have learned a lot in this culture that any depression or any anxiety is a bad thing. Not only is it a problem, but it's a disease. The DSM-5, basically the diagnostic manual that most therapists can't stand and have to learn how to from beginning to end. A language that we don't really like speaking, but that we have to speak is the diagnostic manual. And the reason that most of us get pissed off about it is that you can take that diagnostic manual and basically diagnose anybody with some kind of, condition. And even though the new one, the DSM-5, is more dimensional, it's still a pathology-oriented system. And basically, the understanding is if you're anxious, well, we should take care of that. And I even see this in alternative situations. There's a great person that I love named Trudy Scott, who has a series of podcasts. Well, actually, is summits. She has an anti-anxiety summit. She's doing her third one, which I really like. I like the people she talks to. I like her perspectives. But when she talks about her own journey, she said, I have no anxiety anymore, zero anxiety. And I hear that and I go, Trudy, what you have is an acceptable level of anxiety. Okay. We don't want to ever have none of any emotion: shame, anger, anxiety, fear, sadness, embarrassment, disgust. All those are important and they have purpose. So this brings us back to the evolution of emotion. Emotion was there from the very beginning. If you define it broad enough, every single living thing from amoeba onwards have emotions. And emotions are designed to get us to act, to do things. And all creatures have a little bit of emotional pain, a little bit of a background hum of the world is not 100% safe. So all creatures, particularly all mammals, a little bit of anxiety and paranoia, a little back there, okay? And I know this because if there was any species that had zero anxiety and zero paranoia, that species, unless it was the absolute top of the food chain, no longer exists. Because whoever is above it in the food chain would have gotten to it, and the ones that were a little bit more paranoid got away. Now, this is fine for animals because animals can't project into the future and the past, and they can't have focused attention. So, they get all scared and they run away from something, and say if you're a prey animal, and then you shake for a while and then you're back to grazing. Or if if you're a carnivore and you have some big fight with some animal, another polar bear or something, you get away from it, you lick your wounds, and you go on and start looking for seals. There isn't a capacity for obsession. Humans have that. We can project to the end of time. We can project to the beginning of time. And very early in our lives, we can learn how to project onto real and imagined fears. And there's two ways of focusing on emotion. One way of focusing on emotion is the emotional coaching way of focusing on emotion. Oh, I have a painful emotion. That emotion wants me to do something. What's the healthiest thing for me to do? I will do that thing. And now that reduces that painful emotion to a manageable level. And now I get involved in doing whatever I need to do in the present moment. Okay, that's a healthy way of dealing with emotion, painful emotion, that reduces it. An unhealthy way of dealing with painful emotion is I have a painful emotion. I have to make it go completely away. And if it's not gone, I'm not okay. I want all the anxiety gone. I want all the anger gone. I want all the sadness gone. I want it all gone. And if it's not gone, I'm not okay. If I'm focusing on emotion with that perspective, I amplify it. And if I focus on it with that perspective, not only am I amplifying it, but also I feel like I'm doing something about it, which weirdly reinforces focusing on it. And human beings can develop habits relatively quickly. After a short period of time, that can be a habit of obsession, for instance. And that can turn into a long-term habit of obsession on account of our minds are capable of programming like this at a very young age, but they're not capable of effectively regulating it from a conscious standpoint until we're adolescents, until we're formal operational. So, now this is independent of developing defensive states, which are a whole nother thing that we've talked about in other episodes, where when we're threatened, we enter states of amplified or numbed emotions and distorted perspectives and destructive impulses and diminished capacities for empathy and self-destruction and self-reflection, self-destruction. Those are defensive states that we're programmed with. Now, those defensive states, if you look at those distorted perspectives, that's the human tendency to want to make a story that explains our present moment. So if we have focused on negative emotion in a way that has amplified it, we have to create stories that make that a proportionate response. So if I'm worried, if I'm a little kid and I'm worried about the tiger under the bed, and I keep focusing on the tiger under the bed, I have to come up with a story of I'm really in danger about the tiger under the bed to warrant the level of anxiety that I feel. And those stories and those emotions reciprocally amplify each other. And I can develop habits, attractor states of going into negative emotions of anxiety and depression. And about a fifth of kids are highly sensitive, and they're vulnerable to do this if they're in certain environments where they're not attuned to, or even worse, they're neglected or abused. Now we fast forward that into a culture where we have zero tolerance for emotional pain. And now we're looking at some endogenous big problems. Because then you have a drug company saying, oh, you have depression. We'll take our drug and your depression will disappear. Well, you take the drug and the depression goes down, maybe, but it doesn't disappear. Take our drug and the anxiety will disappear. Well, the anxiety goes down, maybe, but it doesn't disappear. Well, I must need another drug. I've had people come to me on 6 or 7 psychotropic drugs, 6 or 7. And the reason is they keep going back to psychiatrists. They go, I'm still not feeling quite right. And the psychiatrist is trained to say, well, let's give you another drug. We won't take away the old one. We'll give you another one. Okay. Why? There's a zero tolerance for emotional pain. There is not a cultural focus on what you do with pain is listen to it, do the action that is required, and then get involved in the present moment and move forward. Now, there's a whole nother set of behaviors around moving forward in the present moment involves cultivating positive affects. And that's part of affect regulation that I'm going to discuss right now. But before I go any further, Corey, do you have any questions that you want to ask?
No, this is awesome. Keep going.
Okay. So going back to emotionally coaching and emotionally dismissing. So we want to teach our kids affect regulation. Alan Shore and a bunch of other interpersonal neurobiologists basically say if there is a core mechanism at the heart of human development, it's affect regulation. And they make a persuasive case for that. How well we modulate the emotional experiences that we have in reaction to our own inner experience, our own adaptive unconscious, or shadow self, as I call it, and the world, really determines how we're going to be in the world. How self-aware we are of our emotional states and of the stories that we're creating about emotional states often determines how well we regulate them. And the thing about regulation is that we learn it from, first of all, the type of person that we are. Some of us are more resilient, some of us are less, some of us are more angry, some of us are more happy, some of us are more anxious, some of us are more ashamed. These are all temperamental traits that are 50% heritable. So, we were born a unique type of person, but then we have now this challenge to learn about guiding our own development. And an essential part of that is affect regulation. Now, how do parents help with this? Getting back to integral parenting and why integral parenting is so great. Well, we know as integrally informed people that infants and toddlers and children and so on have different worlds that they see, different cognitive capacities. And what we want to do is we want to give them attunements and input at every level that helps them be healthy at that level and then builds them towards the next level. Now, the first level of that is secure attachment. And secure attachment is about 55% of babies have it. A child is born and there's hopefully 2 or 3 people around where the child, they look at the child, they wonder about its interior experience, they narrate the child's emotional and physical life to the child. I'm talking about infants now. In other words, if you tell an infant, oh, you're feeling happy now, or you're feeling sad now, or it looks like you're uncomfortable. If you do that to a child 3 years later, that child will be able to identify and articulate its own emotions better than a child where you haven't done that. So that's a good thing to do if you have a baby. Similarly, it's good to be present with a kid. Kids want to have parents around when they need them. Congruent, you want how your nonverbals are to be consistent with the state that you're having with the kid. And you want to be marked with a kid because you're communicating to a child's nervous system, which is quite sensitive. So if I look at a child and I go, oh, you're angry, like make an angry face. That child's nervous system knows I'm not angry because I'm amplifying a little bit. This is called marking. I'm actually empathizing, and the child relaxes. Oh, you're sad. Child relaxes. Even though I'm making a sad face, I'm not sad. I'm communicating. So that child feels secure. And as that child grows, it doesn't develop a lot of capacities for dissociation. And it feels like there's always somebody around who understands his interior and is going to protect him and care for him. And this is going back to being a superior parent. You protect your child, do your best to protect, and you cherish them. This is a way of cherishing. But then 10 to 20 months, kids start getting into things and getting around, and they have a separate sense of self, and you have to say yes and no to a child. You have to start setting boundaries. And so now we're going to get into the whole emotional coaching thing. Emotional coaching, a parent will notice a child has an emotion of some sort. Let's say we're talking about painful emotion now. Say it's anger, fear, sadness, anxiety, shame. You go, so you're feeling bad. You notice it at a low level where it can be discussed. Say the kids 2.5, from 2 onward, they can have a little bit of conversation like this. And the kid will go whatever they go, and you go, well, looks like you're mad. Looks like you're sad. Looks like you're scared of something. You talk a little bit about it. And then if there's a problem, kind of help them solve it. And if they're getting into something like, a 10-month to 17-month-old kid hears the word no every 8 minutes because they're always getting into stuff, then there's a boundary. Now that boundary is an important part of emotional coaching. The kids that don't get the boundaries, 6 years later, they're more aggressive with other people, psychologically and physically. Why is that? Because when you're setting that boundary, you can't do the destructive act. You can't say the destructive word. Their nervous system is learning about how to do that for themselves. And then later on, they can pick up at that. Because eventually, we tend to parent ourselves the way that we were parented. So you have an emotionally coaching parent from 10 to 17 months. Most of this is nonverbal. Starting around 2, the kid has capacities for self-observation, for communication. Now, those capacities for self-observation means children can observe themselves. And now, rather than having somebody else disapprove of them, they can disapprove of themselves. But they're still pre-operational cognitively. So, they need simple messages. And up until 8 or 9, you need to give kids black and white messages about moral behavior, acceptable behavior, unacceptable behavior, and so on. But now we're getting to kind of the part of the crux of what I wanted to talk about today. If I'm a parent, if I'm an American parent who has a 0 tolerance for emotional pain, I'm going to communicate that to my kid. And now, even if I'm emotionally coaching, if they're still a little bit anxious, if they're still a little bit angry, if they're still a little bit of ashamed, I go, well, let's just keep at it until there's none of that, okay? I have that 0 tolerance. I'm communicating that to the kid, and that's not congruent with his experience of the world. And whenever we start having messages from the culture that aren't congruent with the drives, we start feeling a little bit crazy. And this is one of the reasons why everybody's in America, on some level, feels a little bit messed up sexually. Because all of us have a unique gender identity that maybe we could probably pick 100 of them. And we all know that whatever our unique identity is, it doesn't quite match what the culture says we should be. When it comes to almost anything about being in the world, there's a part of us that gets this kind of broad message from the culture about how it should be, but we know that we're not quite that. We're a little bit different. That's uncomfortable. Okay? So if a parent has an integral understanding of this, they go, well, that's just the necessary discomfort of being in a culture. I always say to my kids about something, in this country, you can't run around outside naked. In this country, you say please and thank you. And also you do that in other countries too. That's a pretty good thing to do. In this country, you need to be on time. I would give them in our family, this is what the rule is. And emotionally coaching parents will often refer to a family value when they're doing boundary setting and problem solving to help children learn those values and internalize them. And so you give them basically black and white concrete value systems. You are congruent with them. And you're coming from a place with emotional pain is we reduce it, we act on it because emotions want action. And then we tolerate it and move on to the next thing in the present moment. In this sense, we're getting to the healthy aspect of emotional dismissing. There are times when you just suck it up and carry on. You fall down, you get hit when you're playing soccer and you go, oh God, ouch. And you even got a bruise. But you're playing soccer, you're on a team and you go, okay, you shake it off and you go back and you play soccer. And when you've done that, when you've tolerated that and sucked it up and carried on, you've discovered courage. You've discovered a part of yourself in that ordeal. Okay? And that discovery is necessary for development. And we don't have enough of that in adolescence. This is one of the reasons that adolescents go off and take all these stupid risks, because we're not providing appropriate risks for them to take. We're appropriate and healthy ordeals for them to have where they can meet discomfort, act on it to a certain extent, but then suck it up and carry on and discover resiliency, discover strengths, fail and then try harder and then try again. Okay. So we're not having a zero tolerance around emotional pain. We see pain as an emotional driver. And what we want is we want to balance the pain with everything else and know that in the present moment, basically, it's a pretty great place to be. That in the mixtures of emotions that we always have, and we never have just one emotion, we always have 5 or 6. Often we're just aware of the top 2 ones that are, the most intense. But, whenever there's anger, for instance, there's hurt below the surface. Or whenever there's hurt, there's anger below the surface. So I've worked with lots of people that let themselves feel hurt, but don't feel the anger. Or they feel the anger, but they don't feel the hurt. If I'm working with a couple or a family, and you're predisposed to notice the anger in your kid, you're not seeing the hurt. Or if you're predisposed to notice the hurt, you're not seeing the anger. So that part of the child, the hurt part of the anger part, won't feel attuned to. Then will not feel seen or known by you. And that's what we want. We want to feel known, accepted, and protected. That's what makes us feel securely attached. And to feel known, we have to be aware of how for our child to feel known from us, we need to know how people work and recognize whenever a kid has emotion, there's a bunch of them. And that I can teach him the subtleties of that as they get older, but I have to start really simple. And I start really simple from an emotionally coaching perspective. But there are moments where I have to teach emotional dismissing too, to help this child learn how to regulate pain, learn how to tolerate it appropriately and move forward into the world. And then later on, maybe at 15 and 16, begin to have the conversations that most of us in Integral have had with our teenagers and our young adult or older adult children about how they're outliers. In these areas, we participate in these cultures, and these areas we disagree. Why? You see the unhealthy blind spots of a culture and you go, no, I'm not going to go with that. Thank you very much. But I'm going to embrace the healthy aspects of the culture. And so this idea of as an integrally informed parent, to have an emotional coaching attitude towards yourself, to have it towards your spouse, and then from that platform to have it with your children, understanding that part of what you're teaching them is how to understand, feel, and regulate emotional pain, but never eliminate it entirely, to fit it into the chorus of emotional voices that we all experience, and then gradually over time, help them regulate that chorus, be the choir director, so to speak. And of course, being the choir director is a function of progressively developing a witness. Since most little kids don't know how to meditate and aren't interested when you show them, then you kind of engage them in certain kinds of ceremony that activates the self-reflective circuits, so that gradually when they are old enough to start doing meditative and contemplative stuff, they can begin to develop enough of a witness to begin to do this kind of stuff for themselves and then teach their children how to do it. And so integral parenting from that perspective helps us be superior parents. Now, one thing that I just mentioned is a super big deal. The best thing you can do for your kids is to have a happy marriage, have a happy relationship. If your partner and you are cherishing each other and grateful for each other, your kids do much better. And a really good time to up-level that capacity is when you get pregnant and have a baby. Because hormonally, you're opened up when you're pregnant, not just women, but men. Men's testosterone go down 25% when their wife is about to give birth. Their estrogen goes up. Their oxytocin and vasopressin is going up. We're all getting ready to love kids. Well, in that environment, we can also get better at loving each other if that's how we're organized. And then we're also in a culture that doesn't project it as a responsibility that parents of newborns have to maintain and enhance their relationship with each other, as well as develop a relationship with the baby. And people are open. People are really interested in being better parents. And so you just add on to, well, you don't just have to become a better parent. How about if you become a better husband or a better wife too? Let's do that, because you're developing the whole culture of your family right now. It's emergent, and you want that culture to be based on loving each other and being grateful for each other and so on. And I've had this conversation multiple times over the last 45 years with people who are pregnant or about to get pregnant or just had a baby, or they have a 2-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 20-year-old or whatever. And wherever they start, we kind of dive into this. And these are organizing principles that actually work through every value meme, though, of course, when you're communicating them to people, you need to use languages that work with whatever, are the comfortable languages that they have in those value memes. And so that's the thing that I wanted to talk about today around integral parenting, around how consciousness gives us these great gifts, but it also, and not just gifts to create stuff, but gifts of intimacy, but also it comes with these inherent problems. And that these inherent problems have been absorbed and ritualized by culture. And that we want to be a little bit of an outlier in culture to be able to help our children adequately learn affect regulation and learn how to integrate emotional pain to become stronger and more resilient. And so that's my initial wrap on this today.
Woo. Hot fire as always, man. No, that was seriously beautiful. And of course, again, if anyone has any questions for Dr. Keith, you can either submit a Q&A question or you can raise your hand and we'll turn on your camera and you can ask in real time. But, Dr. Keith, as you're talking, one of the things that I just kept thinking about was, it's how integral really allows us to more fully understand how human beings tick, right? That's one of the true gifts, I think, that the integral approach offers us. And, my shorthand for that is the more you can see, the more you can love, right? So
That's right.
I've got a 6-year-old, and I know, based on conversations with you and, with many other integralists, that, this is the time when certain elements of her personality, certain characteristics are coming online that will be with her for the rest of her life. And albeit expressed very differently as she sort of, moves forward from stage to stage in her own kind of developmental arc. But, what the integral mindset has allowed me to do is to actually attune with, identify, recognize, try to understand what those sort of core elements of her personality are, so that I can make decisions as a parent to, keep her on the right track and help her make decisions that leverage her strengths and help her sort of overcome her weaknesses. So the advantage there is sort of twofold. I mean, not only in my heart do I get to feel a fullness just by virtue of seeing more of her, you know what I mean? I'm able to love what I can see, and I see more, so I love more. And that's satisfying and fulfilling in and of itself. But it also allows me to make more skillful decisions for her. Like, for example, recently we had to decide what school to place her in.
Always a big decision, isn't it?
Huge.
What school?
Yeah, because you're looking at, like, in our case, there were 3 schools that we were choosing between, and they were 3 very different schools. And it's basically you're choosing between 3 very different parallel realities that'll emerge 10 years from now. You know what I mean? You're like, what is this environment going to do to my kid versus that environment versus that environment? And what I was able to do was, by recognizing, like in our case with Evie, I think that 2 of her core characteristics are her strength and her resiliency, especially based on everything she's been through in her medical journey and all of that. And also this tremendous empathy and sensitivity, right? So we took those qualities and we said, okay, well, wherever we put her, whatever school we land her in, we want to make sure that it is going to help her, further develop those 2 really beautiful qualities that she has. And I could see that making the wrong choice. Like, if I, basically we had a choice between a Montessori school, a really good sort of middle ground public school, and then like sort of a more hard-edged STEM academy. That's a really, really good school, but it's, it's a bit more focused. And, sort of the decision we walked away with was, okay, well, if we put her in an environment that, is sort of a little too loose, then that'll be really good for her sensitivity, but she won't necessarily be able to develop the self-reliance and the resiliency. On the other hand, if we put her into, something that's a little more hardcore, that might pave over her sensitivity. So we don't want her to become callous. We don't want her to become fragile. So we ended up making the decision that the Montessori school would be a good fit for her, because it's a way, the structured class environments and all that gives her the space to find her own self-reliance, to continue developing these two, I think, again, really important elements of her own personality and her own character without them really coming into conflict with each other. So that's just an example of how, this integral awareness allowed me to make what feels like, in my heart and in my body, feels like a more skillful decision.
It also reflects the fact that one of the more stressful aspects of the current age for some people is that they have to make decisions like this.
That's right.
When I was a kid, you just went to whatever school was in for your district or for your neighborhood.
That's right.
There weren't any choices. And so the more choices you have, the better. But of course, that requires more understanding, more self-reflection, more knowledge of what type of child you have. And it's stressful. Okay. And so we all kind of deal with that. And then it changes as the child changes. Now there's some questions I'd like to answer them. Does that work for you, Corey?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So first we have someone with their hand up. We've got Pat. So I'm going to bring Pat on over.
Okay.
And then I'm going to unmute Pat. Hi, Pat.
Hey, Pat.
Hey, Dr. Keith, Corey, how are you guys doing?
Doing great.
Wow.
I have a question on adult children. Both of our children are in the early 30s, mid 30s, and we just recently left California. We retired and moved to South Carolina. The adult children that was left in California is having a real hard time. And we've had wonderful relationships with both of our kids. But, I'm this understand, feel, regulate. I can understand why he's feeling that way, but it's just really, really tough, to, we obviously want to have a healthy relationship with him, but the move, he took it pretty hard. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, so it was hard for him that his mom and dad left California, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, if it's hard for him that his mom and dad left California, that says a lot of great things about your family, Pat. So congratulations on that. What you don't want is you leave California, he goes, oh, who cares? He cares. And the other thing about it is the level of connectivity we have in this age is extraordinary. And whatever is going on, there's a couple of things. One, you stay connected with your kid, but also I'm really big on supporting our kids having other forms of support besides parents. Like I sent both my kids to therapists, or I didn't send them. They wanted therapists of their own, and guides and coaches and that kind of stuff. And I supported that, in different ways, emotionally, financially, that kind of stuff. And so if there's something going on emotionally that was maybe cued by you and your wife leaving California, you go, well, God, maybe this is a good time for you to talk about it with a therapist. And maybe there's some other things going on. Generally, I've never known that to be a bad idea. Now I know as a therapist, it's like that person, if all you got is a hammer, all the problems look like nails. So I find myself recommending therapy quite often, but I do think that it's a good idea. And telling your son that it touches your heart, that it's your son that we're talking about, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Telling him that it touches your heart and staying in communication and calling him up and checking in with him and stuff to see how he's doing. I imagine that would warm him up and make him feel loved by you. So I recommend that you do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we're going to see him in a couple of weeks. We're going back to California, so I kind of look forward to embracing.
Oh boy, yeah, my son's coming this summer from Vermont. I'm really looking forward to it. Well, thanks for asking your question.
No, thank you, Dr. Keith. Appreciate it, you guys. Thank you.
So there's some questions that people have written, and I want to answer a couple of them have short answers. Okay. Somebody said you're not mentioning attachment parenting. Yeah, there's an awful lot of systems that I have not mentioned, but I did mention secure attachment. The one thing that attachment parenting is a whole series of steps that people have taken using what we've learned from attachment research about children feeling known, accepted, and protected, and parents being present, congruent, and marked to help children feel securely attached. And the one thing that I encourage people who do attachment parenting to add on to this is really work on improving your marital friendship and your marital love affair throughout the first 2 years of your child's life. Often that suffers, and that's not good for children. It's much better for children if parents are also focusing on loving each other, helping each other meet their own relational needs. So that's, to anonymous attendee, you asked about attachment parenting. That is a quick thing on attachment parenting.
And then why don't I read a couple of these to you, Keith, and
Sure.
then you can respond. So I'll start with Kimberly Lafferty's.
Okay.
Dr. Keith,
Kimberly, hi.
Dr. Keith, loving this. The zero tolerance for emotional pain in culture is so true. I've also noticed recently a theoretical idealization of meta-tears post-green that somehow asserts that there will be no pain or no shadow at the higher stages, which, even when the chorus becomes one song, there is still emotional pain. Feels more, bothers you less, Ken Wilber. Have you experienced this denial of pain or romanticization of meta-integral stages?
Well, of course, this is what spiritual bypassing is. You know, anybody in the human potential movement has encountered this basically regularly, even constantly over the last 50 years. And so, yeah. And, you know, here's what the deal about the second tier. In the second tier, if you have that kind of awakening, now you have the potential to be able to observe destructive shadow coming up, defensive states coming up, primitive intrusions coming up, and you have the opportunity to regulate them. They will always come up. The unconscious does not give up capacities that it identifies with self-protection. Now, what happens as we regulate them more effectively is it becomes less and less effort to regulate angry impulses, anxious impulses, shameful impulses, those kinds of things. And at a particular point, when we practice them enough, our unconscious will regulate a lot of them for us. Nobody that I've ever met or read about, or anybody, has ever reached a point where they do not have destructive shadow intrusions coming up in response to an ever-changeable world that they have to deal with. And people who say that often will engage in bad behavior and then have spiritual explanations about why it's bad behavior. You know, a lot of Gestalt therapists used to do that all the time because Fritz Perls was somewhat of an asshole. Good therapist, but, you know, he would indulge his sadistic impulses when he was doing work, and he got to be such a big deal that people didn't call him on it, except once in a great while. You know, like Maslow called him on it one time and just looked him in the eye in a workshop and told him that he was engaging in psychopathology. That was a great moment in the human development moment. So anyway, that's the deal around that. Remember, as we develop, it's include and transcend. Now, we can get better and better at regulating so that we don't indulge destructive impulses, and that we automatically deconstruct distorted stories, and that we regulate distressing emotions to their appropriate level and then act appropriately on them. We can get better and better and better at that throughout a lifetime. And the exemplars of that are the 10th Oxcart people that walk around, and as far as other people are concerned, they're just basically good vibes all the time. But if you looked inside their consciousness, those consciousnesses are tremendously complex, engaging in all kinds of interior self-regulation into compassion. It's not that they don't have the impulses to go to the non-compassionate places. They happen, and they regulate them both unconsciously and consciously. So that is the answer to that question. And it's really great to have you on the call, Kimberly.
Yeah, and I love how Kimberly brought in the frame of hurts more, bothers you less, which, you know, when I was telling our story, about, you know, placing Evie in her school, those became the two qualities that we really honed in on was, again, strength and sensitivity. And Keith, this is also a really nice extension from last month's conversation when we're talking about, you know, we're talking briefly about snowplow parents who parents who have this, I think, instinct, like, I don't want my kids to suffer. I want my kids to be bothered less, and therefore I'm going to make sure that they are hurt less, right? And that actually prevents resiliency from developing rather than promotes resiliency. You know, so when I was making a decision on where to place Evie for her school, you know, sort of the calculation in my head was, you know, I want her to be in a place where she can hurt more, where that sensitivity can really allow her to tap into, you know, the experiences of the human beings around her, but be bothered less by, be blown away by that, be less fragile in the face of that empathy and that sensitivity.
And this is where integral understanding helps, because we cross-validate through all 4 quadrants. You know, when I was a kid, my parents were both teachers. And they said, if another kid hits you, hit him back harder. That was their understanding. The idea of going and asking an adult to manage that situation to them was immoral. And so that's what I learned. And it always felt wrong to me as a child. I thought, wait a minute, somebody hurts me, I have to hurt them more. Okay, that does not feel right. Okay, so we've looked at that style of being in the world and that style of parenting, and we've discovered that that messes kids up, messed me up. Okay, not that I was in any studies, but you know, we've had studies to see that. And so now we know that there are way better ways of dealing with that particular situation. And that if that happens, that what a kid does is they go find a competent adult to resolve those issues. And that what you want is both kids to learn from that particular situation so that everybody is up-leveled a little bit. And indeed, 8 out of 9 conflicts with kids under 9, you know, with siblings anyway, ends with somebody bullying somebody or somebody running away, unless there's somebody there facilitating a more cooperative and collaborative a set of using emotional coaching techniques of problem solving. And here's another example of this. Emotionally coaching parents, when they're teaching a kid something, teach that like this. They show kids something and then they wait and let the kid fool around with whatever they showed them. And they wait and they ignore mistakes until the kid does something right. And then they go, wow, that was pretty cool. Here, try this too. And then they do the same thing. Now, the kids learn stuff doing this, but the subjective sense of the child is they're remembering, that they're creating it. You know, when they ask kids about, well, how'd you learn how to write that? Well, I kind of just remembered it. Okay. Now, an emotionally dismissing parent will be all over that child. No, don't do it that way. Do it this way. And they'll get frustrated and they'll start attacking the child if the child doesn't show expertise and the child gets anxious and unhappy. Okay. Well, we know that children don't learn very well under those circumstances. And we cross-validated that around all 4 quadrants. Okay, so if we're an integrally informed parent and we're aware of the cornucopia of data about what works better or worse with kids in general, and with your type of kid in particular, because you're talking about a child, for instance, you're talking about Evie being a little bit sensitive. Well, about 1/5 of children are super sensitive. Mm-hmm. You know, those kids, if they're in an abusive environment, will develop a lot of bad problems. Those kids, if they're in a super supportive environment, will actually develop more resilience than other children, because that extra sensitivity, when it's harnessed with emotional coaching and protection and cherishing and attunement, develops into emotional strength and resiliency. Now, some kids are harder and some kids are less hard. And that's a whole nother thing that has to do with goodness of fit between parents and children. And we can talk about that in a little bit. But there's a couple of other questions.
Yeah, so let's get to Howie's question, which I think is an awesome question. Howie says, I'm currently struggling with trying to explain to my 11-year-old why we make certain parenting choices. I find myself battling with lower left influences in regard to things like food and sugar, screen time and social media, pharmaceuticals, etc. How can I better explain to him why we make certain psychologically and physically healthy choices at his current developmental stage? And the reason I love this question, Keith, is because it really underscores the fact that integral parents have to be something like chameleons over time. You know, integral
Oh, yeah.
parents are being called to be like a half stage ahead of wherever your kid happens to be.
Yeah. So first of all, at 11, children are making the transition from concrete operational into formal operational. Now, what that means is that they're beginning to have understanding of relativistic concepts. But as a parent, you know that that's very variable. It depends on their state of consciousness. So if your 11-year-old is upset, that child isn't going to be very formal operational. That kid's going to be concrete operational. And that's not just true, by the way, for 11-year-olds. It's true for 21-year-olds, 31, 51, 91, whatever. People get distressed, they tend to regress, and they get more concrete operational. So what you do is you have to, you set the boundary. I mean, you tell the kid what the standards are. And when you're dealing with screens and sugar and stuff, you go, look, this is what is healthy and this is what is not healthy. And so we insist on you acting in a healthy fashion because screen addiction is a serious problem. Sugar causes a lot of problems. It has mood issues, it has metabolic issues. It can make you sick. Okay, so how you manage the food that you eat and the water that you drink and the sleep that you get and all these other things have a lot of effect, not just on how you feel, but on how healthy you are. And until you're old enough to regulate yourself to have a healthy life, then we're going to set boundaries, standards. And often what I told to my kids and what I encourage you to tell your son is when we're comfortable that you're regulating your screen time or your sugar intake at healthy levels, then you can make your own call. If what we observe is you pushing yourself into unhealthy territory, our responsibility as your parent is to say no and to set a boundary. And I had this conversation with my kids starting from when they could talk. Okay, this is what I believe is in your best interest. So that's why and not just always your best interest, because part of the deal around children, and apparently this is back to the snowplow thing. Parents are not service providers. You know, children are not like, you know, entitled people who have these adults that are obligated to take care of them all the time. Children are citizens of a family where everybody has responsibilities. They have psychological and emotional responsibilities. They have physical responsibilities. They have self-care responsibilities and so on. And so they have to, it's not just about them all the time. It's about the family, or it's about dad, or it's about mom, or it's about their sister or their brother. Okay. And you let them know this is one of those times where it's about the family, or this is one of those times where it's about your sister, or this is one of those times it's about your mom. Okay. And what that boundary does is it anchors you in a core value of we're all here to support each other's development and we're all developing. Now, when that's a problem, when your 11-year-old gets pissed and you get into one of those conversations where it goes around a circle 3 times, okay, if there's any parents listening, and I'm sure there are a lot, raise your hand just for a moment if you had one of those conversations with a kid where it's just going around a circle and nothing's happening. Okay, when that's happening, that means that child's in a state of consciousness where they're receiving nothing. So what do? You go, okay, well, we're not going to talk about this right now. We're going to contain this current situation. The boundary stays, and later on, when you're calmed down, we'll talk about it. Later on can be a minute, 10 minutes, an hour, that kind of stuff. Now, that doesn't just go for kids. That also goes for parents. I recommend parents give kids time out so that parents can calm down. Because if I feel my arousal level going past a certain point, I'm going to start turning into either a bully or I'm going to turn into a wimp. And parents who turn into bullies or wimps basically either try to out-bully their kid that they're feeling bullied by, or they let a kid who's, you know, generating emotional intensity to try to control the moment, they let a kid bully them. And when you say yes randomly to that, random intermittent reinforcement is the most powerful kind. You're teaching your child how to dominate environments by raising their level of negative emotional intensity. You know, don't do that to kids. Okay, so this is where it starts getting more and more complex. There was one of the questions was, what have been some of the most, this is from an anonymous attendee, what have been some of the most difficult integral challenges you faced with your kids, Keith? How did you and your wife handle them? So all challenges are integral challenges because we exist in a universe with 4 quadrants. You know, we're all different types of people, and we're all going in and out of different states of consciousness. The challenges that I've had over the years had to do with external stressors in the environment. For instance, a preschool teacher molested my daughter when she was 2.5. Okay, that had a lot of negative effects on her and my family, and we had to deal with that. And I had to come up with a strategy to try to protect the preschool because my daughter wouldn't talk to anybody about it, and the other children, and to protect my child and help her recover from that. That was quite challenging. Or sometimes there are interior challenges with goodness of fit. There were times when my son or my daughter would enter a state where they were kind of caught up in a negative affect, and it broke my heart to see them suffering. And so paradoxically, I would get impatient, even contemptuous of them staying stuck in a negative place. And I needed to learn as a parent, if they're in that place, I have to allow them their pain, be relaxed and loving and so on, and wait until there's a moment where I can help if I can. Okay? They need to find their own way of regulating their emotional pain. And just because I am a cornucopia of advice about all that stuff doesn't mean they're going to come to me. And they didn't. They went to their own therapist and went to other people a lot of the time. And it was a challenge to me to realize that that was the case, and I needed to support that process and not blame them for it if they didn't want to receive my advice and, you know, suffer what seemed to me in a way that was unnecessary. And so, you know, those were challenges that we've dealt with over the years.
Just hearing you talk about it, Keith, my own arousal levels start going through the roof. And whenever I hear you talk about those stories, I just feel rage come online.
Oh yeah. It was a bad time.
Yeah.
It's even worse than it sounds, but I won't get into it. But my bottom line around it is, and I make this point in my upcoming trauma book, Trauma into Transcendence. Trauma is never preferable for any of us, but it's inevitable that trauma will happen of some sort. But what makes it acceptable is that you get stronger and wiser on the other side. And so when, you know, that and other problems happen with my family, my job as a leader in my family was to help us all become stronger and wiser as a result. And we did. Right. And so if you ask anybody in my family about that time or other problems, they'll say, yeah, well, that wasn't a good time, but I grew from it. And my whole family grew from it.
Right. Well, this is just one of the many reasons you're one of my favorite people on the planet, buddy. So Michael asks, this is another great question. Can you talk more about the kinds of ceremonies that might promote witness and meditative awareness?
Oh yeah. This is going to be a whole nother episode that you and I are going to do about the other world. Okay. What I call the other world. Okay. To me, the other world is a place that is existing all the time that I'm very familiar with. And I first encountered it symbolically with, I don't know, books when I was a little kid, you know, fantasy and science fiction. I love science fiction because science fiction said there is something there. It's not like, I'm not making this up. Okay. And then when I became a martial artist, when I was 15, I began to get these glimpses of something way bigger than me that could come through me under certain circumstances. And so as parents, if you're part of a religious tradition or if you're not, there are moments where there are ceremonies that you can do with your family that bring you together and open up little passageways into the other world that give you a chance to step through and feel good things. And here are a couple of examples. When we had dinner together, my family, we would have a ceremony where we would all sing a song called the peace song before, which would kind of anchor us, like people say grace. And then we'd have a ceremony where everybody would talk about the favorite part of their day. Okay. So that ceremony had all of us self-reflecting on what was the favorite part of our day and articulating it and talking with each other and so on in a way that really worked well. My children learned about dreams at a very young age, and they would talk about their dreams. And then we would do a little ceremony with dreams. So what do you think your unconscious is telling you? What do you think the message of that dream is? Or if there was a particularly cool part of the dream, like my son dreamt about a unicorn, why don't you hang out with that unicorn a little bit right now? You know, what does the unicorn have to say? And you teach a little ceremony like that. Occasionally what happened is a kid would find something that caused them to enter a flow state. For instance, my daughter found dance at 18 months. I remember her. She's 18 months in front of a mirror, just dancing. I mean, Jesus, she looked like Kali and Avalokiteshvara. My wife went, where did that come from? And my son, he learned Thai stick fighting. Okay. And so they started doing that. We supported them. You have to enter contemplative states under those circumstances. And what was fun with the stick fighting, of course, is that I know martial arts. My son and I would spar together. And then there were ways there's always a ceremonial aspect when you're doing martial arts with another person that gave me a chance to initiate him into warrior archetypes and warrior ordeal perspectives. Here's another one. I was talking to a kid recently where, for some great reason, his parents found this wonderful place in Canada where a bunch of kids get together and go down a river every summer for a month. They have to sleep in tents and they have to figure things out and so on. And it's really safe and it's really protected and everybody's good vibes. So this kid really discovered something about himself in nature. And in nature, sometimes when it's super beautiful, you can stop and go, so let's all let ourselves be one with nature, which is a contemplative practice. First time we backpacked in the Sierras, when we didn't go again, we went backpacking in the Sierras, my son was 6. And when we came out of the mountains, he cried because he was missing the mountains. And so we really honored that. And to this day, he goes off in the mountains, he rock climbs and does stuff like that. He has a relationship with nature. To this day, my daughter dances and finds a connection dancing. I taught both my kids meditation, suggested headspace to them. Sometimes they've meditated, sometimes they haven't. I encourage them, as I encourage everyone, to find the self-reflective, contemplative aspect of whatever you're doing, and then, to amplify that. Generally, self-observation with compassionate understanding is what you're looking for, which is why I generally just teach attunement, to be aware with acceptance and caring intent of what you're sensing, feeling, thinking, judging, and wanting. Having that attitude is useful, but then there's these little moments that occur. And sometimes there's ceremonial moments, like kissing somebody goodnight and bringing down all the spirits to bless you tonight. Sometimes they're like the ceremony around our dinner table. Sometimes they're doing yoga or Hachidan-kin or martial arts with your children, or dancing with your children for that matter. All these things provide these little moments, and you'll feel them. There's a little bit of sense of connection, attunement, and sacredness. And when that happens, as a parent, what you do is you relax into that and expand it. And the child will feel it. They feel it at every age. My infants felt it. My kid would be crying, and I'd hold them and attune to them, and they'd calm down. Okay, so I knew what was happening. Guys who aren't fathers will hold kids on the left or on the right. If a guy's a father, within about a week, he's always holding a kid on the left. Why is that? Because a child prefers to be communicating right hemisphere to right hemisphere, because the first year, the right hemisphere is most active and is being programmed. Your metabolic system, your cardiovascular system, your immune system, all your affect systems. And the father feels that and instinctively holds the kid on the left. So the child feels his heartbeat. And so it's the right hemisphere, the left eye, looking into the left eye of the child. It's the left ear, the right hemisphere that is listening. That kind of stuff happens at a deep and mysterious level. And so what you do as a parent is support it. And also notice when you're not there and go, okay, my job is to regulate myself so I can get there, which is really challenging. I would always get challenged when I had to set boundaries, because I hate setting boundaries for people. And so, my kids needed boundaries. I initially did it, begrudgingly and contemptuously. And I needed to learn how to set boundaries with a good vibes and compassionately with a sense of humor. And that was, easy in some areas and hard in others. And so my job was to get better at it. And I'll keep getting better at it, I guess, for the rest of my life. I hope I do.
That's beautiful. And I think it's another one of the true gifts of the integral approach, is that it reveals that there are so many more ways to interface with sacred than probably most of us knew about when we were growing up. A lot of us grew up in, more traditional families or non-religious families altogether. And there was no real way to interfere. You kind of had to discover it for yourself, or for a lot of us anyway. That's sort of been my story. I think one of the big advantages of integral spirituality, just sort of as an entire field, is it helps you recognize all the ways that we are just permeated by this, by this consciousness, which means there's so many different opportunities to open up to it. Some of which are going to be more or less developmentally appropriate for your kid, depending on where they are and, what type of states you can talk about. Right now, my daughter, again, she's 6 years old. So we're taking sort of a more Amber approach where we're teaching her the stuff in terms of like the virtues. What I mean? There's kindness is a virtue, and it's important because it's important. You don't need to look any deeper into it than that.
Yeah, it's black and white. That's good.
Right. That's right. In 5 years, we'll have a conversation about why it's good to be good. But for now, just know that you're supposed to be good. And I'm able to notice things like how, for example, she's much more comfortable with the word spirit than she is with the word God, which I find really interesting. Just how culture has, sort of shaped these concepts for her. So again, I think one of the real gifts of Integral is that it just expands our toolbox and expands our own language in terms of how we can talk about this stuff and how we can help enact these states of knowing and states of being in our own kids.
When I was a surfer, there was something different about going out on a day where there was surf. And I realized it was like going to ceremony. It was like going to church. The insight to me about that is I want that awareness of the universe all the time.
Yeah.
That the universe is my church, and the sacred is always there. Why do we meditate? Why do we engage in practices? We engage in them so eventually they become an ambient part of our existence. So there's that background hum of the world's not a safe place. There's also that background hum of we're all connected. Right. That we're all one, that we can all be antenna that are transmitting and receiving love, joy, and wisdom all the time if we direct ourselves in that direction. And that's a good conversation to have at every level. In an integral family like you're having with your daughter, the question isn't often is so I believe this. Mommy believes this.
Mm-hmm.
What do you believe?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you like spirit better than the word God. That's fine with me. That works. You see that sense of what is your emergent spirituality? I have one. I have what I think is right, and I'll present it to you. But then you'll end up experiencing, and choosing.
Mm-hmm.
That children have a profound sense of personal dignity. All parenting is collaborative. Children have to cooperate, even if you're setting a boundary. It's a collaborative process. And so the more a child feels respected, the more collaborative they'll be, but also the more that you take a stand for what's right, the safer they'll feel. In other words, it's not okay to be unkind. Okay, in our family, it's not okay to be unkind. That's against the rules of our family. And so if unkindness happens, then we look at it with interest. We do that emotional coaching thing that we talked about earlier. Now, first of all, I gotta say, I know an awful lot more about parenting than I did when my son was born almost 34 years ago. But I had a lot more energy 34 years ago than I have now. So I don't know if I would have done a better job if I could go back, because I couldn't have done all the physical stuff that you have to do with little kids. For instance, rough and tumble play. Kids need that. Okay, well, I'm a lot more protective of my body at 69 than I was at 36, so 37. It's a dialectic of progress, so to speak.
Oh, come on, Keith. You're in better shape than most of my 40-year-old friends.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. But I really, really hope that I'll never have to have to invest the energy that I had to invest. Not to say that I didn't have a lot of fun. I really loved raising children. And nothing's changed me more than being a parent. I was writing my third book. I hadn't published these books. These were written after my doctorate. The night that my son was born, I stopped writing and didn't really start writing again seriously until he went away to college. And part of it was I knew that I couldn't be a therapist and be an author and be the kind of father I needed to be. And so kind of put that stuff on hold for 17 years. And in retrospect, I'm glad Keith did that. That was good for our family. It was good for me as a man, and it was good for my kids. You know, they need you to be there. Fathers are important, mothers are important. Time with your kids are important.
Beautiful. Wow. This is like a lovely note to leave things on.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll have other episodes about parenting. It's really important. One thing that I want to make a point about is that as integralists, we can know that the drives exist, first of all. And, we talked about this around the college scandal. The drives to take care of our kids and love them and cherish them. And so they need to be integrated, though. They can't be suppressed or repressed. You can't repress a drive or deny a drive and not have developmental consequences. And so what we do is this culture allows a lot of the drives to be supported and some not. And so as an integral parent, you go, okay, that's fine. I'm noticing what they are, and I know that they all have existence. And I'm trying to find how they're manifesting in me and my children and my family, and support all of us integrating them into healthy, happy lives. And this just goes right back to just the mandate and integral of body, mind, spirit, and self, culture, and nature. And that organizes us as parents. And there's a lot of great data. Attachment parenting was one, emotional coaching is another, growth mindsets, self-regulation, affect regulation, maintaining and enhancing your marital friendship and love affair, all these things. There's a lot of data now. It's hard to remember all of it at once. And so this is why we engage in contemplative practices and self-observation, so we can observe ourselves moving through the world and always be making adjustments towards the beautiful, good, and true. And if we're doing that with ourselves, it makes it easier for us to do that with our kids as we gradually learn what types of people they are throughout development. And that's part of the magic and the beauty of being a parent, and the blessing to me.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Keith. As always, it's been just a beautiful episode. And thank you to everyone who joined us today.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, particularly all of you guys who asked questions and showed up on camera and all that. It's like our favorite part of the show. So that's going to do it for this month. We will reconvene on the first Saturday of June. I'm not sure if we know what our topic's going to be yet, but we'll figure that out soon. And in the meantime, again, please check out the survey that's right underneath this video.
Yeah, do our survey.
Yeah, fill out the survey. It's very helpful, and we'll love you even more than we already do.
Much love to everybody. Thank you for being on the show tonight.
All righty, guys. Take care.